The best leaders are self-aware, and our guest today would say self-evolved. That's why you're here, is to grow, and if you are, you're in the right place. Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Let's go.
Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We are here each week to help you lead more confidently and make a bigger difference, both professionally and personally. This episode is sponsored by From Manager to Remarkable Leader, Kevin's flagship workshop based on his proven leadership model. Learn more at remarkablepodcast.com/manager. And now here's your host, Kevin.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. Glad to have you here. Hopefully glad to have you back. Today, we're talking about being or becoming a self-evolved leader. And to do that, I have a guest. He is the expert on becoming a self-evolved leader. His name is Dave McKeown. He is a person who is awesome. I've been talking to him for about 10 minutes before I hit record. Let me tell you about him, and then we'll dive in. Dave helps individuals, teams, and organizations achieve excellence by doing the extraordinary things extraordinarily well. He started his career as a consultant at Accenture, quickly moving to become the CEO and then the president of Predictable Success, a consultancy focused on helping complex businesses achieve scalability. While there, he also ran Inc. Consulting, a joint venture with Inc. Media, which helped companies on and aspiring to be on the Inc. 5000 achieve consistent, scalable growth. He is the CEO now of Outfield Leadership and the author of a new book, The SelfEvolved Leader. See, I told you. The SelfEvolved Leader. Elevate your focus, develop your people in a world that refuses to slow down. I am excited to have him here with me. I enjoyed reading his book, and you're going to be glad that you're here. Dave, welcome.
Kevin, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be with you.
So you've got an accent. Well, at least compared to me. So I like to ask people sort of a little bit about the backstory. So the accent says there's probably a backstory, because I know that where you live, not everyone around you has that accent. So tell us just a little bit, Dave, about your journey, how you ended up doing what you're doing now.
Sure, happy to. So my accent is from Northern Ireland, of all places. I've people sometimes think I'm Scottish. I've had Australian, South African, a whole range of different origins, but it's Northern Irish, and I grew up there until I was about 18. And my mother's side of the family still lives there, and I now live in Southern California, but my accent hasn't fully relocated behind me. It's sort of hovering over the Atlantic Ocean at the minute. And you know what? I started my career back in the UK, as you said, working for Accenture a number of years ago, and discovered probably pretty early on that those leaders that had the most impact on their team, on their clients, on their organizations weren't necessarily the ones that were functionally the best at their job, although some of them were, but that they had a whole range of different skills, behaviors, mindsets, perspectives. I mean, I guess call it good leadership. And that twigged in me a lifelong desire to understand or better uncover what it meant to be an effective leader, and then help other people get there. And then fast forward, 12 years now, moved over to the States, first of all to Massachusetts and then Southern California. And I now have the joy of teaching and training leaders how to elevate their focus, develop their people, and get more done.
There you go. So I'm guessing everyone who's here would want all those three things. So when Dave sent me the book, I took a look, and the more I dove in, the more I said, hey, I think I want to meet Dave. I want to have him on the show. So self-evolved leadership. Everyone's got a moniker. Everyone's got a thing. So sure. What is self-evolved leadership, and specifically why that name?
So the SelfEvolved Leader as a book is basically the output of 12 years worth of work that I've done with senior leadership teams and individual leaders to help them be more effective. And one of the things that I realized over that time was we've somewhat en masse given over or ceded control for our own growth and development to the organizations that we work for. We say, well, I'll do a good job. You put me through some training, you give me some experience, you give me promotions, and I'll grow and develop that way. But what I saw and recognized was those leaders that were performing at a higher level over a prolonged period of time had more ownership over their own growth and development. So they wouldn't wait for that opportunity, but they made it part of their daily work lives, not just to functionally do their job, but to push themselves to grow and to develop. And so that for me is all about evolving yourself, becoming a self-evolved leader. So that was where the term came from. And there are a couple of characteristics that are really key to self-evolved leaders. Number one is that they push for growth, that they understand their strengths, they understand their limitations, and they build experiences and learning opportunities to allow themselves to grow. But also there's a whole bunch of other characteristics, things like vulnerability and empathy that self-evolved leaders have, because in the same way, when you're pushing for your own growth and development, you're building much more of that emotional intelligence that Goleman spoke about so many years ago, of just understanding the impact that the decisions that you have on other people around you. So there's this real intentionality behind being a self-evolved leader that I don't see every leader unfortunately adopt, but would love to see them pick up that mantle of intentionality and a focus on their own growth.
No, there's no doubt that too many folks, leaders and otherwise, cede all that responsibility to the organization. Say, well, I really wish that they'd send me to some training. I really, at the simplest level, right? We can get to all the other things you said. You said something in the middle of all that, was not anything at all that I originally thought we'd talk about, but I'm going to pull it out. You made the comment about that self-evolved leaders are very aware of their strengths and limitations. So there's a lot of people that talk about, do we work on strengths? Do we work on weaknesses? Where do you come down on that sort of dichotomy?
I was going to say it depends on the time of week, which means that, I see that there's value in both of those. I think an overemphasis or an underemphasis on either one of those is problematic. I think you've got to double down on your strengths, absolutely, because that's what you're good at. But on the flip side of that, when I see leaders to say, oh, well, I'm not good at that stuff, so I just build my team around me to pad that out, that sends warning bells and warning signs to me. There's nothing wrong with a leader saying, you know what, I do understand my limitations. I've tried my hardest and my best. I at least understand how that works. So now let me build a team that can really complement that. But you'll often find a leader that just goes, oh, well, I'm good at the big picture stuff, but all of the details I'll just not bother with. It's like, well, have you even tried? Do you even understand? And I think there needs to be a balance between both of those. You can't overvalue or undervalue one or the other approach. And so it really does depend on the individual leader I'm working with or the team that I'm working with, whether or not there's a sense that, okay, let's really play into this, or let's spend some time shoring up their weaknesses.
Yeah, I think that makes a great deal of sense, because the reality is it is contextual. It is very much about where that individual leader is, right? So I was coaching someone today who has some really strong strengths, and what I've been telling him is, hey, strength overused becomes a weakness, right? Becomes a blind spot. So I think we're probably in almost lockstep agreement about that. It's just one of those things that everyone asks about, people ask about, people wonder about, and people like us often have an opinion. So I'm glad that you shared yours. So say a little bit more about the model. I mean, sort of what are the components? You mentioned several things, vulnerability, intentionality, and some of the things, but give us a little better picture. And we're talking about his book, The Self-Evolved Leader, but really quickly, give us a little bit more about the components. Don't tell them everything, they need to get a book. But give people a little more of a high level overview.
So the notion of the self-evolved leader came out of a organizational cultural context that I've seen more and more, particularly over the last couple of years, where I feel that a lot of managers and leaders get stuck in a cycle of, let's call it mediocrity, where they're not doing bad work, but they're not doing their best work. And where the cycle of mediocrity comes from is, in a world that just moves faster than the latest social media trend, and in a world where we've given anybody permission to interrupt us at any time in any way that they want to, and deem whatever priority that they want to put onto it, we've got to a point where almost everything feels like it's urgent. And I think there are a lot of managers and leaders out there who believe that in a world where everything's urgent, where we need to push for results, the fastest and most effective way to deal with that is either just to do the thing myself or to tell somebody on my team what to do. So, somebody comes to us with a problem. Hey, boss, we're about to lose our biggest account. All right, no worries. I'll get on the phone with whoever the guy is that I know and solve it and sort it out. And that's born not from a bad place, but we've been rewarded all of our life for knowing the answers. That's how we typically do well in school and academia. That's how we get jobs. That's how we get promoted. But at some point, then it becomes, to your point earlier, a strength doubled down on becomes a weakness. And what we're really doing is we're sending a subliminal message to our team that says, if you've got a problem, come to me, I'll fix it for you. Because that's how I lead. I lead through acts of heroism, of diving catches and saving the day, and stealing victories from the jaws of defeat. And you build learned helplessness in your team when you do that. Over time, they just say, well, if I've got a problem, I'll just come to my boss and say, hey, Kevin, got a problem? What do you want me to do? And I stop thinking for myself and I stop solving those problems. Then feeds back into the vicious cycle of you become the bottleneck, you become frustrated because you're overworked, and you're looking at your team thinking, if only these guys would work and girls would work as hard as I would, then would be okay. But the reality
they're giving you a chance to. They have to bring everything to you.
Right. And so you've created this pattern of negative behavior from both sides of the coin. And so having seen that play out time and time again, and working with my clients to help them break out of it, I realized that the best way to do it is to replace one pattern with another. And so instead of operating in this cycle of mediocrity, let's operate in a cycle of excellence, where instead of focusing on the urgent, we focus on the important. Instead of doing the work for our team, we build a shared accountability. Instead of disempowering them, we empower them. And then we get to elevate our focus. Then we get to focus on, and this is the crucial point, self-evolved leaders, where they realize and understand where they add value is on the medium and long-term direction of their team and the development of their people. But so many leaders don't get the opportunity to spend time there because they're just caught in the cycle of mediocrity, fighting fires on a day-to-day basis. So that's the foundation of where it all came from, really, for me.
So we're having our one-on-ones, hopefully, but we stay focused on what's right in front of us. And I will say, from all of our, first of all, as we're having this conversation in the middle of May 2020, when most everyone's still working from home, added challenge to all of everything you're saying is true forever, has been, will be. And yet right now, when so many people are working from home, we have this added challenge of when we work from home, our time horizons get shorter. And so you are, as my leader, are shortening the time horizon by not looking out. Man, we are really in a problem, because I'm already not seeing further out without your help. And if you're not seeing out, if you've ever driven your car looking at the hood ornament, you know how, and that's how we end up leading. And that's how things end up working.
It very much so. And I think one of the dynamics that's happened right now is, like you said, that horizon of focus came all the way back to what needs to happen today, this hour, this minute. And whilst we're just getting to the point where we might be able to start thinking 6 months and 12 months out, certainly for a long time, or for the last couple of months, it was, you've got to start thinking 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. And I think that's fundamental number one of crisis management. Whenever a crisis hits, you stop the bleeding, you get the triage, and then you slowly begin to extend that horizon again. So you look at the 30 days, then 60 days, then 90 days, then you go, wow, we can start to look 6 months out. Now we can start to plan 12 months out. But you're right, it's the leader's job to do that. That's where they add value to the organization. But if I'm in the weeds with just helping you sort out your Zoom or your latest client issue, or whatever it is, I don't get the opportunity to do that. And so one of the things I constantly remind leaders is, when was the last time you elevated your focus to something beyond this week or this month, towards this quarter, towards this year? And if you haven't done it, now is a really good time to book in some time to take a look at that.
And that's going to always be true. So as this comes out, and of course, neither of us know when you're going to watch or listen to this. You know, that's going to be at least probably August based on my current plan. But the reality is, whenever that is, that statement is going to still be true.
Absolutely.
And if that resonates with you, then this book, I think, is incredibly timely. And again, timeless and timely. So there's one particular piece of the book, and I told you that I wanted us to spend a little time here. It wasn't meant to be a trip up. You talk about the importance for us as leaders to build discipline, and you specifically talk about some what you call micro disciplines, which I think is a great way to think about these things. Every one of these, I'm going, yep, as I was going through them, and I thought it might be kind of fun for us and really instructive for everybody else if we just talked about a couple of those, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Is that all right?
Happy to. Yeah, absolutely.
And as I bring these up and we chat about them for a second, everybody, you'll see how they're connected to the ideas that Dave's just been sharing about us getting ourselves into a frenzy, living in the moment, living in the urgent and being in this sort of frenetic place. So the first of the micro disciplines that you described or you talk about is called taking a pause. Mm-hmm. First of all, why? And second of all, how do we build the discipline?
We have been trained to respond verbally and fast to almost any situation that comes in. And whether that's a new idea that you have, or if somebody on your team has a problem that they want to share with you, or there's some data that comes in, because we live in this world where everything moves so quickly, we've been trained, at least implicitly, to just move fast, just gather the information, make your decision, and move on. But what often happens is we suck out the energy and the oxygen from a broader or a wider discussion when we do that. And when you take a pause, a number of wonderful things happen. Number one, you give yourself the moment to really assess what you're thinking about it. But number two, if you get masterful at this, you let silence do the heavy lifting, and you let your team come to the table with their own perspectives and their own solutions. You add more value as a leader, and this is counterintuitive to most of the things that we've been told. You add more value as a leader if you say nothing and your team can come up with a solution to your problem than you do if you tell them what to do. And so there's value in your silence. And I see it in high-performing leaders all the time. They are slower to put their thoughts into the mix. Not necessarily naturally. There are some people that are naturally slower than that, but they've learned to do it.
Bite their
tongue.
It's a
learned behavior to bite their tongue. Yeah. And some people literally start this by sitting on their hands. They give themselves a physical reminder to just bite their tongue and just let silence do the heavy lifting. So that's where taking the pause sits for me, and the importance of it.
What I find is that, because that is hard for me personally, and what I find is that if I'm thinking of saying something and I can't stop from saying it, I just ask a question. I mean, not a leading question, just another question. So I really want to know what you all think. Mm-hmm. There's a point at which, I mean, I'm with you 100%. There's a point at which the pause becomes so overwhelming, right? We always try to jump in, be the hero again, right? To not let it be too long. But if it really feels too long, ask another question and stay. Right. Agree, disagree?
I'd say yes, and which is a really nice way of saying yes, but when we're trying to on any behavioral aspect, when we feel that something that we're trying gets uncomfortable, if it's the reverse of the behavior that we normally do, so in this instance, taking a pause, when we get to the point where it starts to feel uncomfortable, that's the point at which you've got to just hold it for a minute or two, because your natural proclivity is going to be all the way over on this side, and you want to go here, so you got to draw that out a little bit, to the point where it starts to feel excruciatingly uncomfortable, and then that's the point at which it'll start to feel slightly uncomfortable for everybody else.
And I agree with you 100% on that, because I've had people say, okay, I'm going to have you stand in front of this group or sit in front of at the head of the table and tell me when it's been 10 seconds. And 3 seconds, right? So I'm with you. I'm saying if it gets to the point where you got people looking like they don't even understand what you were waiting for them to comment, right? You gotta facilitate. But I'm right with you. We do, so many of us, especially if we're extroverted, but even if we're not, because we think as the boss, we're supposed to talk, right? Yeah. So I'm right. We're really in agreement. I totally agree with you.
And you used a great word in there, which I think is unfortunately I was going to really butcher a word there, misunderused, which is not a word at all. It's unfortunately underused in the leadership vocabulary, which is facilitate. Great leaders are great facilitators because they facilitate discussions, debates, and decisions with their team in a way that that person who rushes to give their perspective doesn't. And so great leaders hold the space for other people to get to that point together. And I just feel like we don't value that as a leadership skill, and we should do more. I'm biased because I'm a facilitator and I love it. I get really passionate about it. But I think that if more leaders could become facilitators, they'd have a much better outcome with their team.
Well, we got two things that are again, we're in agreement. We had two things that are the counterbalances to that. One is leaders think they're supposed to have answers. Right. Back to the heroic leader you were talking about earlier. And two is we're always living in this urgent, so we think we can't wait because we don't have time. So that's why I think this whole idea of taking a pause is so important. Talk about another one of the micro disciplines for a second, and that is setting context. Talk about that one a little bit.
It's linked. I mean, like you said, all of these are linked. When we're in the weeds of the day-to-day, you know what it's like. You're so close to everything that we lose that bigger picture. We lose a couple of aspects. We lose our overarching why quite often. We lose the impact that our decisions have on a wider group, and we lose our sense of transcendentalism, I guess, for lack of a better word, in all of that. And I think high-performing leaders constantly, in subtle ways, remind their team of the context of why they're doing why we're doing what we're doing. What does it lead us to? Where does it get us? How does this all fit together? And it's the difference between, giving your quarterly or your annual rah-rah, here's who we are as an organization, and then everybody forgets about it. And just those ongoing conversations. True alignment in an organization comes whenever the majority of the people in your organization understand how the actions that they take on any given day add up to achieving our overarching mission, vision, and values. And in order to do that, we have to get good as a leader at setting that context, telling that story, so that people aren't just doing things for the sake of doing them, but there's much higher degree of buy-in towards it. But again, it's one of those things where if I'm saving the day, if I'm the hero, I ain't got no time for that. So if we can find a way to stop being the hero, actually then you become more of a cheerleader, of a coach, of providing that longer term direction, providing that why that really ties us all together.
Awesome. Well, there are more micro disciplines than that, but I picked those two for us to chat about a little bit, and I appreciate that, Dave, very much. So before we wrap up, I want to do something that I do on the show sometimes, and I've chosen to do it with you, which you may say, why? But this is what we call what I call the fast break. The fast break
Awesome.
this week is brought to you by The Remarkable Way, our ongoing way to become a more effective leader, one skill at a time, 1 month at a time. You can learn more by going to remarkablepodcast.com/way. So here is how the fast break works, Dave. I have 3 words. I'm going to say the word. I just want you to just like whatever you immediately feel compelled to say or your first thoughts. It's not like free word association, really. It's like you talk about whatever you want using that as a starting spur. Are you ready?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. First one, coaching.
It's about helping your team come to their own conclusions and not telling them what to do. One of my favorite books is by a guy called Michael Bungay Stanier. It's called The Coaching Habit. And he talks about staying curious a little longer, rushing to action and advice giving a little bit more slowly. And that, I think he's nailed the part of coaching more than and better than anybody else has.
Michael's been on our show a long time ago, a long time friend of mine as well. Michael Bungay Stanier. Everybody, you ought to follow him. The Coaching Habit, and the brand new book there is The Advice Trap, I believe.
That's right.
Second word, vulnerability. You mentioned it earlier, vulnerability.
There is strength in vulnerability, and it's not about shirking away or being overly emotional. It's about saying, the reality is nobody can lead with certainty anymore because there's too much complexity and too many variables in the world. It's about saying, here is my best guess, my best understanding. I'd love to hear your perspective. Let's find a way to build a solution together, and let's have some fun whilst we do it.
Third word, strategy. I mean, I got an Accenture guy. I got to use the word. Like, there you go.
Most strategy is useless because it's not reviewed on an ongoing basis. Your strategic plan is much more than a document that you write up once a year. It should be a living and breathing, and it should be something that you return to often, both individually as a leader and as a leadership team. That's the only way that your strategy will really work.
All right. So now the fast break is complete and you get an A.
I passed? So excellent.
You get well, I suppose right now no one's getting A's. They're just passing or failing. So, okay. Just 2 or 3 more questions before we're done.
Sure.
One is, so when you're not writing books and helping leaders grow and develop, and I'm sure you find that enjoyable, what do you do? But what beyond that, what do you do for fun?
I play the guitar a little bit and sing like a strangled cat. My wife is a much better singer than I am, so I'll strum the guitar while she sings. We cook a lot together. We're very fond of cooking, and we live in beautiful Laguna Beach. So whenever we can, we get down and see the water and put our feet in the sand.
Perfect. And the only question you knew I was going to ask you is this one. So what are you reading these days, Dave?
I just finished a book not so long ago called The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker, which for me was a fascinating book. I have a fascination, probably just stems from the work that I do, about crafting compelling experiences for people. So whether it's my clients or, just if we're entertaining around here. And it's just a fascinating book that the subtitle is How We Meet and Why It Matters. And she just breaks down every element of bringing a gathering together. She talks about it from both a corporate perspective and from a personal perspective, and walks you through a series of really practical steps that help you create and craft a compelling experience. And it was one of those things where half of the book I was like, oh yeah, I do that. That's awesome. I'm really glad that I somehow do what we're supposed to do. And then the other half of the book was, hey, there's some really good information in there. I'd love to try to integrate some of that in what we're doing. And it's become particularly pertinent just given everything that's happened over the last couple of weeks and months, because obviously so many more of our gatherings are online now. So how do we create compelling experiences for people online?
Cool. The Art of Gathering.
Yep. Yes. By Priya Parker.
Perfect. So now the question you probably wanted me to most ask of all. Dave, where can people learn more about your work, get the book, etc.?
If they go to selfevolvedleader.com, you will have all of the information about the book. And if you go to Dave McKeown, McKeown.com, you can find out everything about me and the consulting and training work that I do and the speaking work that I do. And also connect with me on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter. I'm all Dave McKeown on all of those platforms.
He is on all those platforms. You can find him. You certainly can do that. So now a question for all of you, everybody. Now what? What are you going to do? Maybe one of the micro disciplines struck you as something that would be useful for you. Maybe some of the earlier conversation that we had is what hit for you. It's what is the thing that you will take from this and take action on? Because until you do that, this was just an interesting diversion. Then, once you choose and once you take action intentionally, then and only then will this really have been of great value to you. And we hope, both of us hope, that that's true. And we hope that you'll do that. And Dave, thank you so much for being here. It was a pleasure.
Thanks so much for having me, Kevin. It was a fun conversation.
So everybody, before we go, we would love for you to join this conversation, get updates on what we're doing, have a hand on what we're doing, even tell us who you think we ought to have as guests. And you can do all that by joining one of our social media groups, either on Facebook or LinkedIn. Take your pick. Go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to join us there. And of course, wherever you happen to be watching or listening to the podcast, I hope you'll give us some feedback. 5 stars would be great, but any feedback would be wonderful. We'd appreciate that. And again, I appreciate Dave and I appreciate you for listening and watching. And I'll be back next week, just like every week, with another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast.